Hello, my name is Daniel Schoonmaker. I'm the Executive Director of Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's presentation of the Michigan Sustainable Business Forum webinar series. For those who are not familiar with our organization, the forum is a collaboration of businesses and institutions dedicated to promoting practices that advance climate leadership, social justice, and the creation of a circular economy. We host events and programs throughout the state, including this monthly webinar series, which is sponsored by Shupan with additional support from Foresight Management. There are a couple upcoming in-person events happening throughout the state that I'd like to highlight quickly. This Monday, September 19th, in Grand Rapids, West Michigan Business Forum, we're hosting a luncheon at John Ball Zoo to discuss how local business institutions are advancing rainscaping and low-impact developments. Speakers will show different approaches to rainscaping being used by local organizations, highlighting a range of accessible to intensive projects underway by both small and large enterprises. You can register for this event by clicking the link found in the chat. Then on September 27th, we'll be hosting a sustainability happy hour event at Hopcat East Lansing, featuring professional network and a short program highlighting the need for investments to address climate change, promote environmental justice, and economic development in the capital area. We will also be briefly discussing the IRA at that in-person event. Finally, on Wednesday, October 5th, we'll be hosting the Triple Bottom Line Bash, the signature function for local sustainable business professionals in the West Michigan area. This program will honor local companies with the West Michigan Sustainable Business of the Year Awards and recognize 3 professionals with the West Michigan Sustainable Business Hall of Fame induction and the Future Hall of Fame Award. Limited tickets are still available, can be purchased also through the link in the chat. If you're not already, please do consider becoming a member of the forum. If you're already a corporate institutional member or a member of one of our regional programs, a professional MiSBF membership is complimentary. If not, you become a professional member today for only $50. Now I'd like to begin our program for the day. How sustainability leaders should prepare for the Inflation Reduction Act. For our attendees, please note that you can share thoughts and questions with the panelists or all attendees to the chat function. We will have time at the end of the presentation for open questions and answers. Our featured speakers today are Emily Wirzba, Senior Manager of Federal Affairs at Environmental Defense Fund, and Michael Green, Director of Climate Energy Policy at Sustainable Business Network. Our first speaker, Michael Green, leads the ASBN Climate Energy Working Group and assists with the organization's overall strategy on climate policy. From 2012 to 2021, Michael was the Executive Director of Climate Exchange, one of the leading U.S. state policy think tanks focused on state decarbonization strategy. Under Michael's leadership, CXC grew to over 20,000 members and responsible for state-based initiatives being introduced across the country. In 2006, Michael was presented the Champion of Change Award by President Obama for his commitment to climate change as an equity issue at the White House. Michael currently serves on several nonprofit boards, including the Carbon Business Council, World Boston, and chairs the World Bank's Carbon Pricing and Leadership Council Advisory Board. His passion for protecting our climate stems from his adoration for the great outdoors. Outside of his office, he can often be found roaming the nearest mountains on his bicycle, skis, or in his hiking boots. He's also, as we just discussed, is a passionate hockey fan and is still living the dreams of 1997 Stanley Cup loss. Let's introduce Mike. He lives in Woodstock, Vermont, with his wife and young son. Michael, looking forward to having you introduce the IRA to our attendees today.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you so much for having us come together and discuss this amazing topic. And, of 1997 Stanley Cup championships, Flyers losing to Detroit in a sweep prepared me for anything. It was really for the heartbreak of being a climate organizer and activist as a career later in life. But heartbreak no more. We were down in DC earlier this week celebrating the passage of the IRA, and I'm really excited to get to share with you all some of the things that we're keeping an eye out for over at American Sustainable Business Network. And hopefully you'll find this resource helpful and useful. I have a little presentation that I'll go through. I'm going to go through it pretty quick. So don't worry as if you have to like write down or jot down any of the information on the slides, because I believe it's either already been sent out to you or is going to be sent out to you guys following this presentation. So you'll have all of my speaker notes. So feel free to use that and save trying to read the slides for maybe a little bit later today. So yeah, let's go ahead and hop right into things. I'm going to share my screen. While I'm doing that, it looks like you guys have some amazing events coming up that you should also be engaged in. I think I saw that one of them was at the zoo. How freaking cool is that? I'm kind of jealous and wish that I got to go to events that are, a great topic, but also at the zoo. That sounds wonderful. So the before I get into the Inflation Reduction Act, just a quick word on American Sustainable Business Network. We're a network of just about 250,000 businesses spread across the country in all 50 states, all different shapes and sizes. We have state affiliate members that are organizations such as your own, as well as groups like the New Jersey Sustainable Business Council, the Green Business Network of Santa Fe, and so on. And a lot of mom and pop brick and mortar, but also our larger businesses who are kind of out front leading in this industry, such as Patagonia. I don't know if you guys saw the announcement earlier this week from the Patagonia CEO, but that is some true leadership to be giving over his share of the company to fighting the climate crisis. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit here about the IRA. In my presentation, I've broken it down to sectoral impacts, and the dollar amounts that you'll see are the dollar amounts that are going to that industry based on the achievable outcomes and deployment outcomes that it hopes to have. But what I would like to also spend a little bit of more time on with you all is actually talking about how this money is going to be released, how it's going to be available, what it means for your individual businesses. So at the highest level, we're going to go to what's in the bill here. So, we have probably the largest investment that we've ever seen to date going into addressing climate change, with really an economic policy here more than anything else. We're talking about a 40% reduction in emissions by 2030, equivalent to a net gigaton of emission reductions, which is quite substantial, moving us well on our way to meeting our commitments to not only our future generations, but also to the globe underneath the Paris Agreement. What we're going to expect out of this is $369 billion that's going to be released and invested over the next 10 years. And then there's also some great investment and opportunities, not just in climate, but also in Medicare and prescription drug costs, which maybe we'll save that though for another presentation. Okay. So I'm going to go right into the energy space on this, and we do have some notes on that I just went through or went by on the environmental justice impacts of the bill. The administration has done a pretty unprecedented job of bringing communities and frontline neighborhoods who represent different cities and spaces across the country that have often been starved of opportunity to be a part of a clean transition. And we're really excited to see the investments and the scoping that support making sure that money goes to the communities who are on those front lines and need it most. So just a quick word on that. But what are the actual, what's the funding go to, and what is the opportunity at hand? So first, in the energy sector, we're looking at some vehicles and opportunities that you guys are already going to be well familiar with. We're looking at production and investment tax credits. Now, in the past, the PTC and ITC have had a few different guardrails on them. First, they in the energy sector were only available for certain technologies. And then second, they had sunsetting rules that really bound the essentially the created question around the investment opportunity because we were looking at 2 or 5 year sunsetting windows for those programs. Now with a 10-year horizon, it creates a lot more certainty. So if you are thinking about making an energy transition for your business, whether that be rooftop solar, air source heat pumps, or looking into finding new cogen facility investments, we now have a ton more certainty. And as a developer or as a business, you get to decide whether or not you want the investment tax credit, that investment upfront, or if you want it as a set rate on the production tax credit on the back end, buying the energy that's actually produced. So with that flexibility, we're going to see a new range of opportunity for different economic models and different strategies that give the private sector more freedom to decide how they want to mobilize and use these tax credit opportunities. One of the things that I point to, and like what's the scale and magnitude of what this means for the energy sector, is looking at the installed capacity. How much energy is this going to be bringing online year over year? By 2030, we're talking about 129 gigawatts of solar, 31 gigawatts of wind. That's new installed capacity coming online each year. For comparison, our new capacity brought online last, I believe in 2020, was 30 gigawatts of energy. So not only are we going to be bringing on new renewable energy, and excuse me, that's 30 gigawatts across all energy sources and types. So not only are we talking about bringing a lot more energy onto the grid and solving questions and problems around reliability, energy intermittency, and challenges that we currently have in rural communities, we're talking about, like a 6x almost of actual energy coming online year over year in the clean energy space. There's also going to be some funding put aside for new R&D, solving some of the technical problems and challenges that do still exist out in the space. But also with solving those problems, we're going to have a lot more opportunity to bring costs down, make this more affordable and more achievable for businesses across scope and size. I'm going to hold on transportation because Emily is going to give a wonderful overview of what this means specifically for the transportation sector. But I would just add a few things that I'm most interested in is removing the caps for the production limits, and then also the opportunity for moving over to clean fleets is just something that is really, really going to be a game changer for those of you who have been watching the technology come online and have been curious about what it would mean to switch your fleet over to electric vehicles. This is absolutely going to create an opportunity where that's realistic and that there's actually the manufacturing capacity to meet that need. So really excited for that, but we're going to leave that a little bit later for Emily's remarks. On the manufacturing side, we're going to see, again, the same kind of credit investment opportunity, looking at switching over our manufacturing facilities to clean energy and moving past kind of the carbon intensive that we've dealt with. But there's two things that I think that go beyond that for the manufacturing side. Also, for companies, in order to meet the production tax credits and have these various incentives and programs available to them, there's also guarantees that the projects have to be made here in the US, or the products, have to be made here in the US to a certain either sourcing amount or refining amount happening here. This is going to yield a manufacturing boom across the US in the industries that are going to be supporting the deployment of these technologies. That's really interesting and exciting for us because not only does it make the United States a leader, it's going to guarantee that the jobs, the R&D, the technology are really going to be built here on American soil. It's an amazing opportunity for, I talk about Philly. I'm originally from upstate New York, and we deal with a lot of the empty manufacturing hubs in Rome, Syracuse, Utica, not far away from my hometown. So the opportunity for some of those facilities to be repurposed and find a new way in this new space of clean energy technology support and development is an amazing opportunity. There's also a nice carve out for money going into ports as well that I wanted to discuss that are going to be supporting not only cleaning up our ports and making sure that our ports switch over their energy sources as well, but play a strong role in the adaptation and resilience to the climate crisis in our coastal communities, whether that be up and down the coast or across the Great Lakes. I think is really something that we need to be paying attention of, and I'm going to get to how we mobilize around that money here in a second. There's also some conversation about methane emissions in this bill. I think is worth keeping an eye on. A majority of the policy focused on methane emissions are going to be on major point source methane. As I'm sure you're all aware, methane is a large contributor to greenhouse gases and the heating of our planet. But it's also a inefficiency of manufacturing and a lost opportunity, if it's just escaping out of our wellheads and into communities and people's waters and the like. So jumping on making sure that we do a better job of capturing that methane, putting it to use, or making sure that it's not polluting our climate or our water is going to be an important thing. I'm going to jump over to greening the gray. So I talked a little bit about the opportunity for ports, but it goes beyond that as well, looking at climate smart agriculture practices. If you're a business or you have business membership in the ag space, I know there's a lot of excitement about the Farm Bill in 2023, but there's also a fair amount of opportunity in this bill as well, where there's going to be money put into fighting, not only fighting forest fires and forest conservation, but also looking at carbon sequestration support and opportunities within soil, as well as supporting degraded soil and getting it to back up to production capacity. That's going to be coming through incentives in sustainable practices, whether that be optimizing fertilizing use, expanding cover crops, as well as making sure that, we're doing the best to make sure that our carbon sequestration in soil stands to benefit future of not just those lands, but also our future generations. So with a little bit of time I've got left here, I want to make sure that I stay within the bounds of my 10 minutes. I want to just talk about we'll go into the next steps because I think this is helpful, but I'm going to go back to the thing I mentioned earlier about the grants. I think it's important for us to understand how beyond the production investment tax credits, these monies are going to become available. For organizations that are that have a business constituency, it's going to be really important to work with your local, municipal, state agencies and offices to understand their priorities of going after this funding, and then what the value and opportunity of bringing the business community to the table. Actually, ASBN recently engaged on a Department of Agriculture opportunity where we went in with about 15 other organizations and received a pretty amazing grant to support agriculture and soil carbon sequestration opportunities. And that really shows that what we're going to need to do to go after these climate resiliency planning dollars within the IRA, that first we need to make a clear case that the business community needs to be at the table for those conversations and a part of that planning. It can't just be large 1 or 2 businesses, corporations sitting at the table. It needs to be the full business community. The second thing is that making sure that the plans and strategies that are put forward take into account critical infrastructure that the business community needs to have in order to flourish in place, whether that be making sure that there's certain precautions put in place for extreme weather events, or that be, looking forward and creating the right economic hubs in order to take advantage of these blossoming industries. The business voice has to be represented. So if you're interested, the first place you should be looking for some of these larger planning grants is going to be your own municipal, city, and then also state agencies who are going to be going after these opportunities and making sure that they're well aware that the business table needs to be present. And we could be happy to help and work really closely with Dan on that. Going forward, we're actually in recent conversations with the White House to put together a platform that'll walk businesses through how to take advantage of the investment tax credits and the production tax credits, as well as, depending on your business type, business size, and the opportunity that you think is best suited for you, what that pathway looks like in order to engage them. A lot of that funding is going to kick off in 2023 on the ITC and PTC work, and we want to make sure that we have the proper resources available for you all, so that way you can make the most of it and really be a part of this transition. Unlike the grants, it's really going to be in these other opportunities for the business community to get involved in the various incentive structures. But if you're an association or business membership group, really looking at those grants as a way that you can be involved in future planning is a great opportunity to be pursuing and have a seat at the table. The Climate and Energy Working Group at ASBN that I chair, it meets the third Thursday of every month. We're going to be continuing to kind of create information, resources for you all as a partner to all the great work that you guys are doing in Michigan. We welcome you to be a part of those conversations, and I hope that I can continue to be a resource. Here's my email. Feel free to reach out. And Dan, sorry if I went a little over time there, sir.
Oh, I think we're really appreciate all the information, Michael, and I think we're we plan for that sort of thing. So as Michael mentioned, and I'll also note that you should have his full presentation either in your inbox presently or en route. If you don't see that in the next 2 minutes, I would encourage you to check your spam filter. There is also longer versions of this presentation on the ASBN websites that, if you're interested in kind of a deeper dive, we can direct you to those as well in the follow-up information. Now I'd like to bring on Emily Wirzba, who I mentioned is the Senior Manager of Federal Affairs of the Environmental Defense Fund. Given that transportation and mobility is such an important sector for Michigan, we've asked Emily to do a deeper dive into this, which is her specific policy area of expertise. So Emily works to build relationships with members of Congress and develop legislative strategies to advance EDF's transportation, electrification, and climate change priorities. Prior to EDF, Emily was a legislative manager for sustainable energy and environment at the Friends Committee on National Legislation, the Quaker Lobby. Emily graduated from Furman University in 2013 with a Bachelor of Arts degrees in philosophy and political science and a minor in poverty studies. Emily, looking forward to learning from you here.
Great, thank you. Yeah, really excited to be here and talk about this important topic. I think it's so gratifying to know that there's been several pieces of major legislation that Congress has passed into law this year. So I'm gonna share my screen and get this going here. All right. Okay, so wanting to talk a little bit, a deeper dive about the transportation policies in the Inflation Reduction Act. And I think it's important just to do a little bit of framing, kind of why transportation is so important. It is currently the largest emitting sector of greenhouse gases in the US economy. According to the EPA, it was 27% of our emissions in 2020. In addition to the kind of climate warming greenhouse gas emissions, there are also kind of other emissions that we're paying attention to, NOx and SOx and particulate matter which worsen air quality and harm public health a little bit more immediately. And we know that often this harmful air pollution that's coming from our cars and buses and trucks are disproportionately affecting communities, specifically low-income and communities of color. And so when we're looking as EDF at our transportation work, this is a kind of critical component and reason for motivating our action. So before delving in, I want to just say that I'm going to be talking about the transportation pieces in the IRA kind of in two buckets. You've got the tax incentives, and then you have the grants. And so I'll start with the tax incentives. And similarly, you'll have these PowerPoint slides, so it's a little bit wordy, but wanted to make sure I've been able to walk through all the details. So the first tax credit I wanted to talk about is for the light duty vehicles. This is the 30D credit. So currently, you can get $7,500 for qualifying electric vehicles. As Michael mentioned, that one of the challenges with that is that there's been a cap on the number of credits a manufacturer can qualify for. And several of the major EV companies, including Tesla, have already kind of reached that cap. And so a really great thing about this legislation is that that manufacturer cap is lifted. So there's no longer a limit if you qualify for the credit. So the dollar amount that you can get has remained the same. It's up to $7,500. However, there are a few new kind of requirements in order to qualify for the credit. There are critical mineral sourcing requirements that are going to be gradually phased in. So the deal is that you have to be making your battery from components that are processed in the US or a free trade agreement country or recycled in North America. And so beginning in 2024, kind of 40% of your minerals have to meet those sourcing requirements, and that gradually gets ramped up over time. Similarly, the other half of the credit is coming from the domestic assembly of the battery components. And so those requirements will gradually phase in as well. And I think I should just note that not all companies will be able to meet these requirements right away. They're pretty stringent. And so we see this as going to be really driving, kind of shifting and changing how the auto manufacturers in the state and in the country are making and assembling their vehicles. Their MSRP caps are added to the tax credit. So I think, and same with income caps, I think Congress was really wanting to make sure that these credits are going to lower and middle income families and not just going to the wealthiest vehicle owners. And I guess I want to also just mention, there was a little while that we thought that the vehicle tax credits would not be included in the Inflation Reduction Act at all. So we're really, really excited that they remained in. And I think there's going to be a lot of work to be done to figure out, who can qualify for these and to make sure that we're pushing the industry to be able to make vehicles that can meet these requirements. So this is the tax credit for new light duty vehicles. There's also a new tax credit was created for used light duty vehicles. And this is particularly important just because we want to make sure that all income levels are able to gain access to the transition to electric vehicles. So there you can get up to $4,000 for the purchase of a previously owned EV. Again, there are requirements around how expensive the vehicle can be, how old it has to be in order to qualify, and there are income caps on that as well for people wanting to claim that credit. Something that I'm personally really excited about is a new tax credit for commercial vehicles. This is a really big deal. In particular, thinking about the cost of transitioning to electric trucks, medium and heavy duty vehicles. It's expensive. And so there's now a credit where, especially for the heavier classes of vehicles, you're able to get up to $40,000 for each vehicle. And we know that in some cases, this won't necessarily cover the entire incremental cost of buying an electric Class 8 truck, for example, but it's a really, really critical first step. And so we're thrilled that this credit is there, and it's going to, in particular, really help people that have kind of fleets of commercial vehicles. There's also the credit for the alternative fuel refueling credit has been updated. So we're seeing a big increase in what you're able to get. You can now get up to $100,000 per item, which is a lot more than what it used to be. There's also now direct pay and transferability included for the charging infrastructure credit, which will help businesses with their tax liability. And one note here, the charging stations that you're allowed to build using this tax credit have to be located in what they're calling eligible census tracts. So they're defining that in this case as a low-income community or a non-urban area. And just a quick note, this is really seen to be working in tandem with a lot of the EV charging infrastructure funding that was passed and signed into law last fall as a part of the infrastructure bill. So there was $5 billion for the NEVI program, the National EV Infrastructure Program. And so we see that kind of working in tandem with this tax credit. So then in addition to all the tax incentives, we've got some kind of critical grant programs in the transportation space. So, $1 billion in grants for Class 6 and 7 heavy duty vehicles. This is including things like school buses, transit buses, garbage trucks, with a focus, 400 million in particular set aside for kind of EPA non-attainment areas, so areas with higher air pollution. And again, what's really exciting is that this is kind of building off of funding for clean school buses in particular that was in the infrastructure bill. This funding is open to kind of other heavy duty vehicles as well, but a really kind of critical piece of the transportation sector to electrify. Also, we see $3 billion for the US Postal Service to purchase zero emission vehicles and infrastructure. The Postal Service has been in the news a lot lately around their commitment to purchase new vehicles. And so this is going to help fund that. And then, as Michael mentioned, $3 billion in grants to reduce air pollution at ports. And this will include funding for electrifying drayage trucks, which are often some of the dirtiest and most polluting vehicles operating in and around port communities. A few other ones just to mention that we've been watching in particular on the manufacturing side. Funding for domestic manufacturing conversion grants to help kind of retool existing auto manufacturing facilities, $3 billion for the Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program, and then a program that will give $3 billion to help reconnect communities that have historically been disconnected because of transportation developments. And so this is going to be a really community-led program to really help advance equity, safety, and affordable transportation. So really excited to see that included as well. And also, a word about implementation of all of this. I think it's a lot of money. We're talking about $369 billion overall for climate, clean energy, transportation. And the agencies have a lot of hard work ahead of them to set up some new grant programs, to write program guidance on how this funding is going to be spent. And a lot of these agencies just went through this process last fall and this year with the funding from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And so I think what we've seen, the lessons that we've learned from that experience are that it's really important to engage with the agencies early on if you have technical expertise you want to offer or ideas for how you think some of these grant programs should be structured. And on the tax incentive side, I think we're expecting that the IRS has a lot of work to do to figure out how they're going to interpret all of these new additions and changes to the tax code. And so I think there's a lot of kind of important work ahead for engagement. And then these agencies will begin to release the kind of requests for proposals for the grants, and there'll be various kind of ways that you can interact and engage. So I'm sure we can talk a little bit more about that as well. But I'll maybe stop there and turn it back over to you, Dan.
Thank you so much, Emily. Now, I'd also like to bring on a special guest today who doesn't have prepared remarks, but I asked to join so that we could, for the purposes of our discussion here, please welcome Danny Mcgee. Danny is the Innovations Director for Foresight Management. Danny's work is focused on building community-oriented system solutions, focus on collaboration to reverse climate change. His company, Foresight Management, is one of Michigan's premier sustainability consulting firms, energy management firms, working with businesses throughout the country. And I'm going to set the stage for all of our speakers here. And what I'm hopeful to kind of talk about initially before we go into open Q&A. And again, if you are participating and have questions, please feel free to use the chat or Q&A function to get those out there. And Michael and Emily, you both cover this a little bit. Now, keeping in mind that so many of the grant programs and other allocations are still getting figured out, But if we're if you're a business or community leader at this point, how should you be thinking about preparing yourselves to access this opportunity? If it's something that is even ultimately going to be relevant to you as far as your ability to directly access resources. And I thought maybe Danny, you would like to kind of kick us off on that, kind of with the local perspective here.
Sure. So, for a little bit of context, Foresight works with a variety of range of businesses, but traditionally kind of people and companies in the supply chain of these large OEMs trying to do this stuff. And I would say, like, when kind of these large opportunities or even small opportunities arise, our first recommendation is to really create some sort of strategy. And all of this is geared toward, Michael, spoke to it, the transition, right? Like transitioning from one state to another. And without kind of a full understanding of like where all of the carbon exists in both scope 1, 2, and even 3 for your company, you run the risk of kind of pursuing opportunities on a short-term basis that might not kind of have the same value over time. A good example, if you're focusing on efficiency measures for, say, a boiler, and you pursue a new natural gas boiler, in the short term, that gives you some efficiency measures. But if you were to say go towards more electrification or fuel switching, that's something that has a lot more opportunity and a lot more money in these bills over time. So I think, just kind of short answer, like really understanding where you sit, but also the upstream and downstream impacts of your business, because it might not just be putting solar panels on your roof that's the best solution. It might be investing in your supply chain, changing a design, or doing something like that that'll ultimately have more payoff in the long term and make your these opportunities more valuable to you. I think that's kind of my first go on that.
Michael, I know you've given this a lot of thought.
Sorry, and I'm breaking up here a little bit. Can you repeat the question?
What kind of building on some of your final slides there? What should business community leaders be doing now to put themselves in best position to take advantage of these investments in the next year or two here?
I think
know
there's
you did cover some of this in your slides already. Yeah.
So there's two parts to this, right? Like first, the investments especially from like the grant pace work, is going to require some form of like planning strategy and like proof of concept in place. So for businesses who are already tracking and monitoring and figuring out a strategy to electrify, to make these investments, they're already going to have a leg up. So in the time you have now, figuring out what that transition strategy looks like for your business is going to be the most important opportunity, I think, to make those grants actually realistic and have a shot at being a part of those larger packages. On the investment tax credit and production tax credit, going through kind of a very similar strategy of looking through where the carbon intensive or cost inefficient, let's be honest, parts of your business where you can actually change modality, change fuel type, and figuring out where those opportunities are is going to be the most strategic kind of use of your time. So that way, when you go into making these investments, you have some like proof of results. And to be frank, a lot of businesses, especially if your business is reliant on outside investment or has been in the past, being able to make that case and have a clear line of sight of what you're taking advantage of the opportunity looks like is where you want to be right now. I had a business that we helped in Massachusetts, who, once upon a time switched over to waterless urinals. And like switching over to a waterless urinal makes a ton of sense what the environmental impact is going to be, right? Like you didn't use water anymore. But unfortunately, the business had never tracked their water usage or water intensity up until they actually, after they had made that investment. So when they went back for that next sustainability initiative that they wanted to embark in at their business, they didn't have that kind of proof of concept of the outcome of the previous investment and opportunity that they took advantage of. So making sure you have that plan and that strategy, the measurements, and starting to correlate not only where the data lives, but what that data looks like and how it's being kept. A lot of us don't have that readily at our fingertips. So I would say starting to get that in place now is something that is going to be worth your while in the long run.
And Emily, what are your thoughts? I know you highlighted some grant programs that are going to get supercharged that are probably things that people could be conspicuously thinking about.
Yeah, and I guess kind of one just thing to remember is that you're going to have to be a little bit patient with the government. It's going to, I think, take a few months for them to just figure out like, okay, like how do we write the program guidance for each of these new programs? What are the deadlines going to be? And so what I would recommend is, as you are planning to figure out which of these tax incentives and programs you want to take advantage of, to try to go to those agency websites and sign up for the email alerts. And they'll actually kind of give you specific program updates via email of like when application periods are going to be, and like they've been doing like community engagement webinars to like share more about the grant application process. And so I think kind of getting on a few of those email lists is helpful, just to make sure you're not missing any key deadlines. And also just, reminder for some of these tax incentives, there's some pretty significant changes made to the tax code, and some of these specific incentives are going to be gradually phased in. So kind of requirements might change year by year. And so just making sure that you're kind of trying to keep up to date with kind of the latest stage and what the requirements are each year. And I'm going to go ahead and there's a link I can put in the chat. So the White House has put out a new website, their Clean Energy for All website. And this is a really helpful tool. You can sign up to get updates, and it goes through and walks how kind of individual consumers can save money and like when different tax credits phase in. And it's a resource hub for a lot of the investments in this. And so I'll go ahead and put that in the chat as well, so you'll have that.
Thank you, Emily. We've got a number of questions in the Q&A. Before we get on to that, I want to ask one more questions for our speakers here, and kind of talking about the process, the bill, that created the bill, and in some of the compromises within it. There has been some pushback from the environmental justice community about certain components of it. And I just want to get any comment you may have about lessons learned from that, and why there may be cause for concern for those who are closer to frontline communities with this type of approach to government.
So I'm happy, I can give just a little bit of a background about what some of the concerns are and how this played out. So I think there are a lot of organizations that have concerns that kind of fall in two different buckets. So the first is some concerns with what's actually included in the Inflation Reduction Act. And the second category is in what this kind of upcoming side deal on permitting reform and the Mountain Valley Pipeline. So within the IRA, there are some leasing provisions that some local community groups and environmental justice groups have expressed concern over, including requirements for the Interior Department to issue leases in both the Gulf and Alaska. And there's another provision within the bill that is tying leases for offshore wind development to offshore oil and gas lease sales. So there have been some concerns raised with those provisions in particular. And then kind of in order, the political margins to get this deal through the Senate and into law were extremely thin. You needed all 50 Democrats to stay united. And so, a deal that Senator Manchin made with congressional leadership was to include, as a second part of this, some permitting reform and the completion of the Mountain Valley Pipeline. And so we still are waiting to see the actual text of what this deal looks like. We've seen a leaked version, and we've seen some outlines from Senator Manchin, but part of what we expect to be included will be setting some maximum timelines for the actual permitting review process, which I think some organizations are concerned will weaken the National Environmental Protection Policy Act, NEPA. So I think there's just concerns around shortening the time frame and making it harder for community input and engagement. So we're still waiting to see what the actual text looks like, but we think this will be added to the continuing resolution to keep the government funded and open. And so that's kind of what Congress is focused on right now. And it's really unclear how this will shake out, because there's been some opposition voiced from both sides. So I don't know, Michael, if you want to add stuff as well.
Yeah, no, I'll add kind of my take on this, and this is, maybe me speaking as an individual, not as my organization, because I, just watching we don't have a stance on this, but I'm maybe reading some of the political tea leaves a little bit on it. First, with the leasing, the long-term leasing of new well sites, whether that be in Alaska or the Gulf, is a separate thing than those projects actually having economic viability and being completed. Could this have been a political chip to bring people onto the table that will never be or may never be realized? Potentially. Let's look at the host of evidence. The most recent auction in Alaska was recalled because no one bid on the leasing. So the fact that they're leasing it doesn't mean that people are actually going to go out and take advantage of that opportunity. I'm not going to call this one way or the other, but the most recent evidence shows that investing community in the fossil fuel industry is not looking for these types of opportunities right now at this moment. And as we look into the future with this energy transition happening, the economic case for the further development of those sites becomes weaker and weaker. The side deal, or now what Senator Manchin referred to yesterday is, don't call it a side deal. And he also said, remove me from this conversation, and talked about how he's trying to recruit Republicans to the table to support that legislation. Now, we have heard that they have been in leadership, still trying to recruit votes for this bill, whatever it looks like and when it's released. But the mere fact that Manchin's willing to say that he needs to bring Republicans into the vote in order to get it to pass shows that it's not this clean slate Democrat run bill that we might have thought it was going to be originally, that the entire party would vote for it. Why would the Democrats splinter their own political party when we are just under 2 months away from the midterm election? Seems to be a really dangerous political motive for them. So not to say it won't happen, but I am less optimistic that, or I guess less nervous of this political moment we're in. And I think that no matter what, we're going to have to continue to stand up and uplift and support the communities that have these wellheads, these rigs, these facilities in their backyard, with or without a side deal. And that's something that I can say on behalf of ASBN, we're going to be committed to continue to do.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily and Michael. So we're going to start going through some of the questions people have submitted here. And the first one, I think this is going to be going to go your way, Emily. So tax credits don't do any good for those who don't pay taxes. Is there assistance for public sector agencies such as roads and parks to convert to EV fleets? I think I know the answer here.
Yeah, wait, what are you going to say?
I was going to say yes, but I'm going to let you. I figure you have a longer one.
Well, so there's in the original House passed version of the bill, there was a lot more funding to help with federal fleet kind of conversion overall, and this Senate version of the bill is a little bit more focused on the U.S. Postal Service in particular, and so that it's a little bit more limited in what fleets are able to apply for, but that's something that I can do a little bit more digging around and see if I can get the answer, if that's helpful.
I do know that there are many programs available currently to electrify school bus fleets. So I imagine some of those, like as they get to the state level, will start to turn towards similar fleets as well.
Totally. And I should just say, so as a part of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law last fall, there was a lot of funding for electrifying transit buses, and a lot of like local and city governments have been applying for funding through that. There was $5 billion for electric school buses, a new program at the EPA, and school districts are already applying for funding for that. So there are a number of opportunities when you look kind of across kind of both the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act that I think that local governments, state governments can take advantage of.
I'll just also add that the White House came out on Wednesday with a Buy Clean policy, and that's another space where they've actually stated they'll be working with the local states on purchasing those decisions, and so I think that's still kind of developing.
And maybe one other thing just to name, so every single state received funding from the infrastructure law to build out EV charging infrastructure. And every single state, all 50, have submitted plans to the government and are kind of waiting those to be reviewed to get that funding. And so I think that investment in charging infrastructure across the country is going to really make it a lot easier to electrify fleets and for kind of all different entities to be able to take advantage of that network.
Yeah, and also I'll note I see Debbie Swartz from the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy on today, who does run some programs for that can support the electrification of fleets in Michigan that are not funded by IRA or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And if Debbie might want to is paying attention, might want to drop a link or two in about what some of those grant programs looked over the past year that may be useful to the person asking that question. Next question here, should state universities be able to have access to grants and strategize the same way as business organizations, or are there differences in what will be available to universities?
I'm not as familiar with this one, but I do know two places that I would look for opportunity. First, in the R&D, as universities are partnered with the various national labs or other laboratories that will be able to go after some of the support investments that are being made in order to bolster manufacturing capacity here within the US is a great place to be plugged in. And then also the other place where I would look for is some of the community planning, whether that be in the urban forest or water management or emissions and air quality planning grants that'll be available. In many places, our universities are the anchor tenant, if you will, of the community and of the city or town in which they're in. So they'd be able to play a very specific role as that in that grant making process and going after some of those planning and strategic grants.
Thank you, Michael. Anyone else have any further thoughts on that?
I can just add that I think that universities are a great example of one where Michael said earlier about creating a strategy to figure out how you're going to decarbonize. And I think a lot of universities have, power generation on campus. They have those opportunities. And so then, I know the question was specifically about like which aspects of the bill fund that. But I think the first step of that is really just even figuring out and making sure that you're funding the right thing. And so be the place to start.
So our next one, and this is a larger question, and I think maybe we'll start with thinking about this with electric vehicles and transportation electrification. So how concerned are we that supply will not be able to keep up with the demand that can be created through these incentives?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a really important one. I think I have a few thoughts on this. So one, part of the intent of this legislation overall was to figure out how do we build out the domestic supply chain here in the US? How do you make sure that we're manufacturing all of the vehicles and batteries and kind of equipment needed to have this clean energy transition here in the US while creating good paying jobs. So there's a lot of pieces in the bill to try to ensure that that can happen, but it can't happen overnight. And so when you look at like some of the electric vehicle supply chain requirements, currently we don't have the capacity to meet all of those at the level that's required. But I think there's a lot of optimism from people that I talk to that these requirements are going to push the industry and the supply chain to like actually grow, so we're able to meet those goals eventually. So I think it's going to be challenging, but I think it's a broader conversation that we need to be having anyways. And so I think this bill will actually help kind of provide some guideposts and some overall goals for us to follow.
And I don't want it to sound like it's like we can't deliver on these, because there's a caveat to this, right? That it's within the US or a country in which the US has a free trade agreement with, which essentially limits the countries that maybe, you would guess out of this. And so not only is it going to create industry and a pressure to create this manufacturing in the US, but it's also going to create a pressure for other suppliers and companies outside of the US to turn towards the US as a key partner in manufacturing, sourcing, and refining. So I think it's not just a US investment in for US sake, but it is going to create stronger relationships and ties with partner countries, and is going to force their industry to look towards us as a resource as well, and bringing back some of that opportunity to US soil, which I think is pretty makes it more reasonable and realistic that we'll reach some of these goals.
Yeah, and I'll also add, someone said earlier about predictable. Like a lot of our companies that we're working with are waiting to make these investments, and they're sitting in the supply chain because it's been a changing landscape, and having a predictable tax structure for the next 10 years changes that, right? And so you're willing to invest in these types of infrastructure that you need to meet these demands with a little bit more surety and a lot less risk.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for webinar today. We're going to stay online here for a couple quick minutes because we have two questions. I'd like to wrap up, and at least Michael has said that he's available to stick around for a couple minutes more. But I do want to thank Emily, Michael, and Danny for spending this time with us and educating us on the opportunities coming available. We'll be sending out some follow-up information in addition to the slide deck that of Michael's that we shared out earlier, and I would encourage you to learn more about the Environmental Defense Fund and the opportunities to support business communities, as well as to mobilize on issues that are important to you, as well as the American Sustainable Business Network, which, if you're a business leader and you're not familiar with the ASBN, you probably should find some time today to go learn more about it and see how you can plug into the activities. Michael's been a great resource to our organization, and then of course Foresight Management is a regular partner of the forum. And if please do reach out to Danny. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and thank you to our speakers. This does conclude our webinar formally, but we're going to stick around for a few minutes here to just answer a couple of those quick questions. Again, thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you. Thanks so much, everyone.
So Dan, can I jump back in on that last kind of question around minerals and sourcing? Because I had another thought on that I think is really like a great example of how that plays out and what that looks like. So right now, Western Australia produces about 60% of the world's lithium. That lithium, critical for batteries and storage and what we're going to need in this transition, goes from Australia to China, where it gets refined, put into batteries, and then comes over. Right now, that's the case. But what we're going to see is actually now that lithium coming to the United States, right? So it's actually going to put us at a clear advantage and incentive to be a preferred trade partner on some of these critical minerals that we're going to need going forward, because we're going to have the market share, building out the manufacturing and refining capacity. And that's, really a win for American jobs, as well as for our clean energy sector. And that's a great example of showing kind of how this could play out in order for us to meet the demand that this is going to generate.
Thank you. And yeah, I'll say the supply chain issues are questions I field quite often. I think a lot of people are skeptical that we'll have access to those minerals at scale, and it does, I think, kind of overlap with other political concerns and just anxiety about the potential potential economic changes this is going to bring online here soon. So here's an interesting question. Any change to how religious organizations, and this person said 501c3s, but I don't know if that's the accurate incorporation for a faith-based institution, can take advantage of solar heat pump credits. I think this is kind of play off the, if you don't pay taxes, how you can use the tax credit issue earlier.
So, I mean, I think they already know their own answer, and that in the PPA and in the lease agreement, the company who holds the project is going to transition that into some kind of on-bill reduction for you, right? I believe is how that's going to play out, and that the nonprofit won't actually have that tax credit because they won't have that tax appetite. But Danny, it looks like maybe you have do you have a different understanding of this, or a better understanding of how the 501c3s play on it?
You're right. I just realized there is a beautiful graphic of how they have made that process easier though through the IRA, and I have to go find it, but it kind of restructures who takes on the risk and makes that easier. So all of the things you said are accurate, but now that process becomes a lot more streamlined in terms of project developers.
Thank for the input. I was going to say that the state of Michigan actually has a grant available right now for faith-based institutions to receive funding for this, but that the deadline was yesterday. So I guess it's less relevant to the person with that question.
Well, the other way that the funding could go through is that there's money that is going to be going into green banks and supporting green banks, creating the first federal green bank, but then also standing up and supporting state green banks, which will become, creating various bonds and other mechanisms that can be taken advantage of, that there may be an opportunity to follow that leadership as well.
This might be the last question that we do here. I'm just trying to gather through it. Can you speak to the best ways we might want to prepare ourselves for urban forestry to quantify carbon capture, stormwater interruption, and whether or not we should focus on underrepresented communities, or would it be a strict urban forest canopy issue? And I think this kind of plays outside of the IRA specifically. And I think there's a second part of this, whether or not we can work with private corporations for tree planting, invasive renewals, or transitioning turf grass and native plantings on private property or only public property.
I think it.
Go ahead.
Well, I'll answer it from a non-IRA perspective in that, I'm going to speak broadly. Companies are looking for ways to better quantify and tell their carbon story. And we've seen offsets, and this is It's kind of like, but we've seen offsets kind of, they're in there's a state of flux right now. There's some really amazing stuff happening in that space, and there's some really disappointing stuff happening in that space. And so I think I can specifically say that there are companies that are doing exactly what you're describing, which is like they're giving up on the whole REC offset conversation, and they're investing in kind of urban forestry type work as part of their carbon story, right? And so I think it's TBD on how that actually plays out and what the structure and policies are around that. But there's certainly signals that are saying that like that's something currently being explored by different companies.
And then from an IRA perspective, I'd say that I would look for, there's, I believe, $1.3 billion specifically looking at urban canopy and forestry, but that money is going to go through municipal grant process. And then the rules around how the municipality allocates that funding is going to be dependent upon how they handle private-public partnerships, and then what the secondary market or other income streams for the project that could generate. I wouldn't look to the IRA to be standing up businesses in that, but allow businesses, projects, and community forestry investments to be a part of that like greater planning, whether that be through urban canopy, but also through air quality grants as well.
Yeah, I will say, if you're interested in the specific topic and in the Greater Grand Rapids area, we're having an event that will kind of, I don't think carbon offsets for infrastructure are necessarily included in that topic, but for some of the related issues like transitioning turf grass to native plantings, it is definitely something that we're working with. And there are certainly other funding mechanisms outside of the IRA that are available to promote that type of infrastructure. And I think I don't want to keep either Mike or Danny too long. I'm just looking to see if we had one more question that we really wanted to help with.
I'm interested in, Caleb just threw something in the chat around CFD. It's certainly, that is a refrigerants and CFDs and those pieces are a big question. So I'd be interested. I don't know where the IRA stands on that, but I'll follow up with you, Caleb.
Yeah, I think if the IRA isn't helpful in that, I believe the Renew Michigan Fund and the Next Cycle Initiative at the state level would likely be helpful with that. And any kind of the last thing up here, anyone have an interest in commenting on the ambulance retrofit question? So the if I could take a stab at it, I would. I like the state of Michigan regularly introduces grants through kind of their clean diesel programs. I would imagine that if they don't currently have something open, that if you reach out to Eagle, they'll give you an idea of what may be coming online in the near future here. And if I can name drop someone as well, I say a member of ours, Padnos, kind of went through a similar discussion recently about whether or not they could justify the increased costs of an electric vehicle even with grant incentives. I know they'd be happy to kind of share how they went through that decision and to make those investments in its fleet vehicles, which I imagine is kind of using similar data sets to what you would for your ambulance. And with that, thank you for people for sticking around. Thank you, Michael and Danny, for sticking around. We don't typically do that, but we didn't have too much time for questions. So I thought it'd be nice for those who had who seem like they're invested in some issues again to give them a chance to hear a little more here.
Yeah, happy to jump in and you guys would have guessed as a Flyers fan, I'm also a Eagles fan. So go Birds. Your Lions are looking pretty good, but we got the better half of y'all last Sunday. But you guys look for a hell of a turnaround season.
I don't know if you've been following. I think most of us are Rams fans now.
Okay.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, Michael, I grew up as a Eagles and Phillies fan.
Great. Well, then we outnumber them, or at least out of what I can see. All right. Hey, thank you all. I appreciate the time. We'll talk soon. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you,
Cheers.
Daniel. Thank you, everyone, for sticking around here.
I guess.